Welcome to Exceptionally Speaking, the podcast where we explore how to better understand and support exceptional learners. I'm Dr. Meryl, and each week I sit down with dedicated educators, parents, and advocates to share real strategies, inspiring stories, and moments of hope. If you're enjoying these conversations or learning something new, please be sure to subscribe so you never miss an episode. Today, I'm joined by my friend and colleague, Dr. Karen Arnstein, educator, researcher, and co-founder of Spiral We. She created the Spiral Model of Development, a new way of looking at how gifted and twice-exceptional students grow and learn. Instead of expecting kids to move in a straight line, her model shows how development loops back and builds over time, helping us see the so-called setbacks as a natural part of growth. Dr. Arnstein's work brings together psychology, gifted education, and real classroom practice to highlight how important connection and understanding are for both kids and teachers. At Spiral We, she guides the conceptual foundations and co-authors the Spiral We Substack and podcast, where she shares tools and stories that make supporting complex learners more doable. She's also spent several years as a researcher at Purdue University on a Jacob K. Javits funded project using positive psychology, things like perseverance, optimism, and self-confidence, to help uncover gifted potential in students who are often overlooked, including multilingual learners, kids from lower-income households, and those whose disabilities can hide their strengths. In this conversation, we talk about why gifted and twice-exceptional student support matters, why regression is really part of a larger spiral of development, and what it looks like to build adaptive connections with kids in everyday classrooms. We'll also dig into Spiral We's new tools, from an educator app to a growing community and courses that turn everyday classroom observations into practical strategies teachers can use right away. You can learn more about all of our guests and find additional resources at hex24press.com. Please enjoy Exceptionally Speaking with Dr. Karen Arnstein. Hey, Karen, welcome back. It's so good to see you again. Thanks for being on Exceptionally Speaking.
Thanks, Meryl.
I know last time we talked together with Barry, and he was on another episode. And so I'm really excited to have a chance to talk just with you and to dig more into what you guys are doing at Spiral We and more in the Spiral Model of Development. But before we jump into that, I would really like to talk about something that I think people aren't talking about enough and maybe don't know about. And that's around funding for gifted education. So I know you and I have both seen truly a really high interest from educators in learning more about how to support gifted students. We know there's so many wonderful teachers out there. There's gifted kids in every class. Yet maybe people don't know that there is no federal funding coming to states for gifted education. And it's really up to the states to decide how or if they will fund gifted education at all in their state. But there is a small but significant federal grant for gifted education, the Javits Grant. And I would really love to hear more about your experience with the Javits Grant and what you see as how it's shaped gifted education and what the purpose could be for the future of the Javits Grant.
Sure. Thanks for asking, Meryl. Actually, for almost 3 years, I have been working on a study that's been funded by the Jacob K. Javits Grant. So this is a grant, it's very small compared to other grants that the U.S. Department of Education, you have to compete for, obviously, and that they manage. So the U.S. Department of Education actually manages hundreds and hundreds of grants. Like, it was shocking to me to find out just how many grants that they manage. I don't even think I knew how many. Like, when I first got involved in the study that I have been working on through Purdue University. So I went from being an assistant professor in Houston. My family could not move to Texas to establish residency. So I said, okay, I have to step back. My own child was starting high school. Like, I'm not going to move him
Right.
around the country, right? When you're at this one time in your life. And so I went to work at Purdue University, it's in Indiana, on a Jacob K. Javits Grant. So this was a study that we were using positive psychology, so the affective domain. And we were using that rather than like the COGAT or just sort of the academic cognitive type tests to determine if kids were gifted, talented, or in some states, they call it high cap or high capability. And so we were looking at this because the research shows that the affective domain, right, your self-esteem, your self-concept, how much you engage with other people, your connectedness, your ability to persevere, your optimistic outlook, those kinds of things directly impact your ability to fulfill your own potential. So we know there's already been studies published on this too about, gosh, what was it? Anxiety. So this happens both for children and adults, that it's been found that if you're dealing with a high stress, highly anxious situation, your IQ is going to drop by 15 points.
Mhm.
So that's your full scale IQ, by the way. It includes your working memory, your ability to recall what you know, your ability to solve problems. And even as adults, we know this too. Like, oh my gosh, I'm so stressed. Like, you can't make good decisions. So the Javits Grant has been instrumental for years, decades actually, in funding this type of innovative research. So how do we differentiate instruction? How do we differentiate curriculum so that we don't have to have radical acceleration where kids maybe have to accelerate 2 years? So being able to do this, but also identify who are these kids? These are kids who may be coming from a terrible situation, low socioeconomic status, right? They're coming from poverty. They may not have had some of the access to education and experiences in their early lives that would help influence their ability to be able to show what they know. They could have a disability that just hasn't been identified yet, but they're incredible problem solvers or leaders, or showing that they're very empathetic for some reason. So, there's those situations. There's kids who are English learners, and we were teaching in their primary language, their L1, we would find, oh my goodness, right, these kids there's always sort of a wall that's preventing them from being able to show what they know. And so working on this project and this study has been, not only has it been exciting for me, but the data that our first year of data collection has yielded, the analysis has been really incredible. It not only confirms what the school district who we're working with Mount Vernon Public Schools in Mount Vernon, Washington.
Okay.
So not only did it confirm what they were suspecting as they were looking at kids and doing assessments towards the end of the year and looking at their portfolios, but we were putting more kids on their radar.
Mhm.
So when I went to classrooms to observe the teachers actually doing the modules and then having an interview with them afterwards for checking for fidelity of implementation, you could see them processing in real time. Like, this student has this really extensive, high vocabulary, but they never have all four legs of the chair on the floor, ever.
Yeah.
They're
Yeah.
just go, go, go. They're constantly moving all the time, yet their thinking is far above fifth grade. One story that too was this one boy who I'm describing. He wrote a story about the blue people and the yellow people always at war. And that when they finally decided that they were going to make peace somehow, they decided that everybody was green. And the
Okay.
teacher was actually showed us his work on the wall and was like, I guess I hadn't I hadn't thought about this before. You could see the wheels turning in real time. And I've been working in gifted education and education, oh my gosh, decades. I don't want to say how long now, but he was one who definitely stood out to me. And it was surprising he was still in a gen ed classroom. Obviously, there was definitely hyperactivity and talking, but he was also a leader of his group. So he was showing a lot of those skills too. So working on a study like this has been exciting. It's innovative. It's a different way of, how do we look for these kids? How do we identify them? These are our natural resources. Just like oil and wood and, all of the other things that we consider to be natural resources, our people are also natural resources too. And we have to make sure that we are supporting and helping this next generation to be able to come up and solve tomorrow's problems.
Absolutely. That's really wonderful that you've gotten to work on that grant. And I
Thank
know
you.
that with the changing political environment, we've had some struggles around what federal funding is going to look like and what it looks like now. And has there been any impact on the Javits Grant in the past few months?
There has been. Unfortunately, we were in limbo for several months. Our liaison in DC, couldn't give us information because they're waiting on Congress, right? But I was actually laid off last week
Oh my
from
gosh.
working on this study. So I was working as a postdoctoral researcher. I was the only full-time person working on this study. I was basically doing project management, right? Like, we built the website, we built 102 modules. I was making sure they were translated into multiple languages for dual language classes. The teachers in Mount Vernon just see the value of this, not just as identification for a tool as for identification, but also for cell curriculum, which for your listeners is social emotional learning curriculum. So it gave teachers the autonomy to be able to choose based on what's happening in their classroom at any given time. So if there's issues with conflict resolution, if there's issues with where they see like, gosh, I really need to do a lesson on gratitude or forgiveness or altruism, some of these bigger concepts that we kind of struggle sometimes to explain to kids why they're important, but yet they get to do something that they co-construct their learning, which makes it more personal and valuable for them.
Well, I'm so sorry to hear
So
that. That's really frustrating. And so your
thank
layoff,
you.
is that due to the grant ending or funds not being released? How do you understand what's happening there?
So far, what I know is that the Senate has not approved to include the Javits Grant funding for the Department of Education. And I just read an article this morning. There's dozens and dozens more grants that are, being publicized now that they're not being funded. And it's such a drop in the bucket if you think about it, but the benefits reach all 50 states and all kids over time. So this grant was not just limited to universities. I mean, school districts could apply for that grant, and they have to be able to do their own action research as well. So it doesn't always have to be a huge study that's, being undertaken.
Right. Yeah. And
And
like
it is, it's disappointing.
it's super disappointing, like we were saying, because we do not have federal funding that is state by state for gifted education. A lot of times, like you're saying, there is really high competition for this small amount of money in the grand scheme of
Yeah.
things for this grant that is specific for gifted education across the nation. And so sometimes that's the only way a school district would get any additional money to put
Yeah.
towards gifted education. And so it's really important and impactful. And I'm sorry that happened. And I hope things turn around. But I understand that right now you have to move forward with the knowledge that you have, which is okay,
Well,
that's,
Meryl, can I jump in
yeah,
really quick? Can I just say one more thing? I think for your listeners who may not always know much about whether it's gifted or high cap, funding or education, I know New York they have just done away with gifted education. And there were a lot of people who said, oh, this is elitist, right? So it just depends because it's state by state that if they're going to determine if gifted education is mandated and if they're going to fund it. And on top of it, I think this is a group of kids who are not well understood. They're very asynchronous in their development. They're not going to all look like young Sheldon. They rarely do, actually. But these are our kids who are really highly at risk for anxiety and perfectionism and depression. They get very jaded that they figure out the system of credentialism really quickly. I mean, usually by about the age of 12, they've got it down. And they say, you know what? I'm just not going to do it. So they're at risk for underachieving, they're at risk for dropping out, and they're also at higher risk than your typical kids for suicide,
yes, they are. Yeah, there's a lot of research that
for
backs
drug
that.
abuse too. Yeah,
Yeah.
drug abuse and suicide. It's
What's so frustrating to me is to watch states make these overarching claims and changes within gifted education, but those changes are being made by people who are not experts in gifted education. And so we're sitting here watching this happen, being like, wow, so misinformed, so misinformed. Like, I wish you had the
yeah.
data. And that goes back to opportunities like the Javits Grant, where like, how can we even get them the information if we're shutting down grant funding in these areas that already we have a ton of high risk kids? So it's so frustrating, really, just no matter how you slice it. So,
And they have a disability on top of it. So let's say they are on the autism spectrum and they're gifted, or they have ADHD and they're gifted, or they're dyslexic and they're gifted, right? So now you're talking about a twice or even a multi-exceptional student because you can add in things like language and race and ethnicity and their socioeconomic status. So all of these factors start
yes,
to weigh
any
in.
socially relevant factor added into the intersectionality, compounding their at risk status, essentially.
Yeah. Yes.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. And it's been surprising. The people I meet are so open and actually like hungry for information. If they are in their pre-service, so they go to college and they become teachers, right? Or they do a master's program to become a teacher. You're lucky, and I mean lucky, if you get 1 hour of a lecture during your entire program. So it's not surprising why most teachers don't understand these kids or why they're at risk.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's not something we can blame on teachers for you should know this.
No,
It's universities not providing the training. And why aren't they providing the training? It gets a little bit more complex, right? And do they have the right data to indicate that it's necessary for them to provide this training? And, right? So if we're eliminating any type of funding, it's going to hurt everyone in the long run for
yes,
the promotion of gifted education.
absolutely. I mean, if we think of our people as a natural resource for this country, yeah, it is going to hurt us in the long run. It will. And it's unfortunate. It hurts. As a teacher, myself too.
I know that while this change is happening, I know, of course, you're not going to stop with the passionate work that you are doing in order to help promote the support of gifted students, twice exceptional students. And so I'd love to hear a little bit more about Spiral We and really more specifically the spiral model of development and how you see that it reframes growth and learning for us as we approach our support models.
The spiral model of development it's a three-dimensional model, and it's really about resetting ourselves as adults. How do we see our students? How do we see our kids? And we never want to think of ourselves as somehow being harmful, ever, right? We're doing the best we can any given day. But there is some harm that's being done by not understanding that some kids are going to have very asynchronous development. So what does that mean? The higher the giftedness, let's just say, right? I don't want to use certain scales, the more potential kids have, the more asynchronous they're going to be in their development. So I know people who have raised and also taught kids, they've had their own kids too, who were profoundly gifted, that they had to stop working to take their kids to college
Yeah.
because their kids were 11. Like they are doing that level work. They've already finished high school by 10 or 11 years old. I teach these kids too. I teach for Athena's Advanced Academy. And so these are kids that I have who are 9 and they're doing Algebra 1. And by 12, they're typically, I know for California, they're working on testing out of the California kind of like a high school equivalency because they're already either they've already taken, or they are taking some AP classes, or they're already doing dual enrollment in college. So you can have a 12-year-old who's taking college classes or AP classes, but they're still struggling with fine motor skills like writing or tying their shoes. So that's what I'm talking about. In terms of asynchronous development, they may still have the emotional maturity of an 11-year-old or even an 8, a 9, or a 10-year-old, but they're doing high school level or beyond work. So it's that push and pull. There's a lot of tension there that's happening. And so we tend to look at like, well, let's just see if we can shore things up and kind of get you caught up. They're on their own timeline. So the spiral model of development, it shifts how we think about growth. Instead of expecting like this nice kind of a straight line, maybe a couple bumps in there, right? But typically we're expecting this straight line of development. What it does is it shows us that our students and our children, they revisit challenges again and again. So they're spiraling back. Now, even as adults, I'm sure we can all think of a time where we encountered a situation that we maybe have encountered in the past, whether it was a social situation, it was a situation at work, like, or something in our personal lives or with our family. But when we revisit that challenge, we have more insight and we have more resources. That resource could be wisdom, it could be a larger group of people that we can draw upon. We have lived experiences to draw upon. We have more knowledge to draw upon as well. So it becomes like a recursive practice. And it's how resilience and identity get built over time. How many times are we going to see this? And by the way, like we teach kids math in the same way.
Yeah.
We use a recursive process, right? We use a spiral process. So by first grade, second grade, they're already being exposed to fractions but maybe by third grade, they're doing this a little bit more complex. So they're still revisiting, but each time is at kind of a higher level, right?
So, how do you see
So
the benefit of understanding the spiral model for teachers? Just having this basic understanding, how do you see that benefiting students?
I think there's a lot, like understanding this in a way. One, teachers don't need to take this personally, right? And that's hard. Trust me, I've been in that room with 35th graders, and you've got the one who's kind of making their slow round, saying hello to everybody because they're doing task avoidance. They're struggling with reading and they're in pullout for reading support. And their reason for doing this is, oh, I needed a tissue, but it's on the other side of the room. So we have this, and it can be really frustrating. And you start to doubt yourself, like, what am I doing wrong? Why isn't this kid getting this? Like, what, my admin's going to come in and they're going to see I have terrible classroom management. And so we have all of these things going on that kids don't realize. So the first I would say is you don't need to take this personally. This is a part of their growth trajectory, and we can support them along the way. But this isn't us either. So once we take ourselves and having a visceral reaction out of it, now we can look at this more clear-eyed.
I think that's a great
And
way
to
to frame
understand,
it. And also, it makes me think about perceived regression for students and how, like you're saying, we can really depersonalize that because as a teacher, you can think like, well, I've taught these skills. Why aren't they moving forward in this way? Last week, they were doing fine with this. This week, it's really not working. Am I a failure as a teacher? Like you get all of these
right?
feelings of like, I'm not doing good enough. And so it makes me think that really truly understanding that spiral model of growth helps you wrap your head around and normalize growth in a different way.
Yeah, and it's difficult because what we're basing like our knowledge is based on is some of it is flawed information. So that gives us a very shaky foundation, right? So if we think about this, like just revisiting Erickson, for example, Eric Erickson did his study, published it in 64, and basically said, oh, here's like the 8 stages of psychological growth for human beings. Now, great, because first of all, he was the first person who actually said, hey, growth continues through the lifespan, which is fantastic. So I'm giving him kudos there.
Yeah.
But the students that I've examined, the people that I've interviewed, the teachers that I've interviewed who are teaching twice exceptional kids, this is where Erickson doesn't fit. Like we have to throw away every model because these are kids who are in multiple stages simultaneously. So you can have a student who is 9 years old. They're making friends like a 12-year-old as if they're already in middle school. They're doing high school level work, but struggling with consistent toileting. So they can be in multiple stages simultaneously. So this is where we talk about how, in a lot of ways, they could almost have that elliptical orbit. They're not going to have that nice, smooth development. There's different areas that they're working on. So what they may have seemed to have understood and demonstrated proficiency one week, the next week, it doesn't even seem important to them to do so because maybe there was an issue that happened on the playground and now they're really focused on their social skills.
Right.
Now they won't think of it as social skills, right? But like that's what they're working on is how do I deal with this group of kids at school that, they said this or they're now focusing on the social domain or being able to regulate their own emotions and how they respond.
Yeah. So it has me thinking, as you gave that example, about that idea of adaptive connection. Could you talk a little bit about what that is and how that can help teachers respond differently to students?
Sure. So when we think about this, we do this a lot. And I think we do this without even thinking about it a lot of times. And I'm not saying necessarily in the classroom, but even just in life, right? But adaptive connection is where, you need to take a look and say, okay, this isn't about a child disrespecting me or my authority. Right? So like, let's take yourself out of this first. Let's look at this clear-eyed and put a different set of lenses on for a moment and really be curious what's going on here with this behavior? Why is this happening? So the first step is really being curious so that you can investigate, find out what there might be more reasons for this. We tend to think like sometimes, oh, is something going on at home, right? Like maybe there's, a divorce going on, maybe there's a death in the family. This is good. We tend to be curious about those things, but that's where it stops. So we tend not to think maybe the student is kind of running into a roadblock here. Our next step after being curious is to start to improvise. So let me try something different. Maybe this style of teaching isn't working with these kids. It just depends. Every year you get a new set of kids and you have to figure them out, right?
Right.
So we have to get curious about this and then we start to improvise. Maybe this will work. Maybe this will work. Maybe I need to let them have a standing desk. Maybe they can't really process and think when they're sitting because they need to be walking in a circuit. Maybe they are struggling with fine motor skills in that domain. So writing down their ideas rather than doing like a voice to text. So we tend to think of this as, oh, well, that child doesn't have an IEP. Like, well, I don't know. What am I supposed to do? So, but just trying things out because we don't know. And this is how we find out. So it's really about that improvisation there too.
And I wonder
And
too
that's where we
about,
start.
and I assume that part of it is when age relevant to include the student in that conversation on. I've noticed that maybe you need a little bit of support. Which one of these things would you like to try? Let's give it a shot, and to help build some ownership with that student as they really, the teacher's improvising, but the student's giving it a shot.
Right. And having the choice built into. I've seen that and I've practiced that in the classroom. I think because I don't come from a background in education is really a second career for me. I come from a background of software development and geographic information systems and mapping and cartography. So when you're writing code or you're debugging code, it's an iterative process. So you do a little steps at a time, little chunks at a time, and you figure out where something is broken. So I apply that same kind of thinking to the classroom, which I think kind of makes me novel. A lot of kids look at me like, wait, what? I don't understand. I have choice in this? But
I think for
I get,
teachers too, like you really, as a teacher, sometimes you have so many constraints being put on you by your district, by your building leaders, by whomever, that it feels like you don't have any wiggle room and you can't be flexible in the
yeah.
classroom. And I really love how you guys have framed this in a way that promotes what is best practice, which is not doing the same thing in every classroom for every kid. So,
Yes. Well, and I've also gotten more buy-in. And that's what the teachers have told us too, is that by including the child in on that conversation at their level and saying, you know what, let's try this. Let's check in again. Let's see how that felt. If you're gonna do writing or maybe assisting in silent reading, but I'm going to give you a plushie to hang on to so that you two can read together. So sometimes, and everybody does this, so you give the option to everyone. So there's different ways to be able to approach this, but I've gotten more buy-in, which makes classroom management a lot easier. A
right.
lot
Yes, that's what we
easier.
want. That's what we want for sure.
Yeah. It's getting curious, improvising, and you're taking yourself out of this. This is not about you. It's not like they don't know to disrespect you,
It's not
right?
personal.
They don't
Yeah.
even know you,
Yeah.
right? It's not personal. So you've got to move from the compliance model to really about communication and teamwork. Hey guys, we're doing this together. So when I'm teaching students online, I always tell them too, if you guys find a link or a resource or something that you think is just going to help everybody, let me know because I'm not out there. I don't know everything. And they
Yeah.
love being a part of that process of creating the class too.
Yeah. Well, thank you for explaining that a little bit more. I really think it's super valuable and am really excited to hear more about what you're doing at Spiral We. So, would you talk a little bit more about what that's turning into right now?
It is really exciting. So we're working on an app. So that's one part of it. The really surprising thing that we've discovered is that while technology has infiltrated just about every single profession to be able to have some support, when you think about it as a teacher, you might have a team of fifth grade teachers, let's say, right? Or you're in the math department or the English department. You're really alone in your room. When it comes down to it, you're the one who's there day after day and you're seeing your kids. So having a tool, like it's almost like having a team teacher,
Mm-hmm.
right? Somebody who's there to support you all the time without any judgment. This isn't about, your admin coming in and now you're being evaluated. But it's really about having an app in a way that you can talk to and have it give you real time suggestions of things to try. So it's cutting out the time it takes you as a teacher to be able to go searching on the internet to try to find resources or ideas. And so there's the app as part of it. And then the second part's the community that we're building. So it's teachers from all over the country. It's special ed teachers, it's gen ed teachers, it's gifted teachers, right? It's inclusion teachers, you name it. And really being able to come together as community to not just support each other, but to also give resources. So part of what's backing this in the app is Barry and I are probably conducting the largest meta-analysis ever done. Like,
So
so
exciting. Yeah.
yes, so it would something take it would take us years to do. We wrote our own GPT. So we wrote our own AI GPT, and it is basically doing data mining. Thousands upon thousands of research articles are being inputted into this miner, right? And pulling out traits. We're also pulling out what are some of the things that teachers have done in their classrooms. What are best practices? So it's kind of like you've got all of this in your phone at your fingertips with a voice to text. So you're not going in an app, right? Everything is pseudonyms, everything's anonymized, and it's a closed loop GPT. So nothing ever gets out to the wider world.
Yes.
Um,
This actually reminds me of earlier in our conversation talking about lack of funding, right? But being able to provide a tool that's like, hey, you don't have to know everything about this. You simply describe the situation that's happening with the
right.
student, and then you're going to get some really specific research informed ideas for how you can improvise. Right. So it's what a wonderful way to use a tool and to bring a community together when we know the funding's not coming vastly across the United States. The funding's not coming. So, like, how can we do this? How can we still get support, build community, and get resources to teachers to support students better?
Well, and on top of that, there's a journal aspect too. So everything that you try goes in and gets logged into the journal. So what you can see over time, like from the beginning of the year to the end of the year, is progress. What has worked for this child? What worked in this scenario or this situation? Maybe they needed a quiet space for math, right? Maybe a different subject that they were stronger in, they needed to work in groups. Can you imagine what this would do for the next teacher who has that student? Being able to have this data to be able to call upon is just incredible. Like, I would be able to build relationships with my students that wouldn't take months, but could take a week, and really be able to establish this in the beginning of the year instead of by like the holidays.
That's amazing. And what is the app going
I
to be
wish
called?
I had that tool.
Do you guys have a name for it at this point?
I don't think we have a name just yet.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
we're working on that.
Exciting.
So we're writing an app. It's specifically for your phone, right? It's going to work on every platform. So that's great. It's going to use voice to text. Now, it's not like you're going to have all 30 of your kids in the app, right? You're going to have those
You wouldn't
2
need
or
to.
3 or
Yeah.
4
Yeah.
that you're kind of struggling with. And it already gives you like, here's the pseudonym that you just choose from. And let's say that you said, Cody, blah, 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 is really driving me crazy today. I don't know, whatever, right? But that it will automatically know that then switches it back to the pseudonym. So you
Great.
don't have
So
to
even
remember
if
the
you
pseudonym.
accidentally say it, it will
Yes,
not capture the
it's
student's information. That's great.
right. So we're still protecting our teachers for FERPA, and we're following all of those guidelines as well for privacy guidelines. But then being able to try out different things. So having that community aspect, because again, teaching, I've been there too. And it can feel very lonely at times, very lonely. And sometimes you have issues that you don't want to bring to your admin, don't want
And
them to
frankly, your
know that
admin
you're
may not know how to
struggling.
solve these issues. So,
That too, right? That too. So having kind of like, almost like a co-teacher in your classroom to help you in real time and to be able to have suggestions on what to try. I just feel like this could not only provide a lot of support for teachers when we see funding being cut back, and also teachers can't do everything. I'm sorry. Like, I have a friend who's a kindergarten teacher and she loves it. She loves being a teacher. But the district she's in is now asking her. So these are kindergartners. So that means they were born, 2020 babies, right? She's now being asked to do a functional behavioral assessment, an FBA. She's being asked to do ABA in a classroom
wow.
when she is not
She's not
trained.
trained to do so. No.
Right. So it's so much is being put on teachers. And I'm like, we have to help them because again, those are the experiences of that interaction with our teachers helps to develop who we are as adults. What we see reflected back from them determines our self-concept.
Love to
So
hear a
that's
little bit more about Spiral Insight. I haven't heard much about it, but I understand it's a project, an element of Spiral we are working on that's related to some courses that are going to be provided. Is that right?
yes. So I'm super excited about this work because this moves from theory into our daily practice. And I know that teachers, yeah, they can respect and understand the theory, but we don't always have time for it. And a lot of times, how do we take that seems, up here and we really apply it day to day? So with Spiral Insight, teachers have a reflective partner. They've got this partner to bounce these things off to. Now, a lot of us, we all have friends in our buildings or other buildings, but that person may be there to hear us out and we need to vent, but they may not always be able to help us see patterns over time without necessarily adding more burden to us or our workload. So the courses and the community, this helps to expand the educator's world outside of their classroom and outside of their building. And they are being able to co-create a lot of processes and practices together, being able to test things and try them out. So this is just, it's a safe person to talk to. It's that reflective companion as well to help you with this. And then on top of this, we're going to offer courses. So there's some micro credentials that are offered here. There's a lot of community dialogue that's being interacted with. We don't always know people in other states. What are they doing where maybe they've got more resources sometimes that they, wow, let's share the wealth of knowledge. And then the community piece of it too is not just across teachers, but we are looking to have family, community, and then also advocates as well.
That's so exciting.
So
That's great.
I want to be able to support teachers so they don't leave the profession.
Yes, that's the
We
idea.
know
Yes.
that there's a high attrition rate, right? Like they leave within the first 3 years. And why? Why do they leave?
Right. Lack
They're
of support.
overwhelmed,
Yeah.
lack of support, they don't have resources. So how do we do this for them?
Well, that's super exciting. And I will for sure be having you guys on again to talk more about the progress and so people can get involved. I will, of course, link everything in the show notes on YouTube as well as on hex24press.com on how people can get connected to this community. So, is there anything else that we haven't gone over that you wanted to share today before we wrap?
Sure. It's a strange thing. I feel like I've gone through the 5 stages of grieving within days. So I went from going to Washington State to do PD with teachers, for a full day. And they were so hungry, like they were so excited to do this, to being laid off due to lack of funding for a Javits Grant. And I think I would probably be the first person who'd say, wow, they've really lost hope, but I haven't. I feel really hopeful because the more Barry and I are talking about this and the tools that we're creating for teachers and families and community to build that community, we have people coming to us offering to contribute their expertise, their time. We've been amazed. Just yesterday, we had 2 new people come to join our team and what can we do to help?
Wonderful.
And we're blown away. So I think Spiral, when people hear about this, I think it resonates because it's grounded in evidence and research. It carries a hopeful vision for a better future in education. And I think that the combination of the rigor and the hope is what keeps attracting people and building momentum. So that's where I'm feeling hopeful about the future.
Well, thank you for sharing that. And I think bottom line is regardless of funding cuts and whatever happens in the future that we cannot see, that we will all still be here fighting for what is right, fighting for the rights of our students and moving forward. And while we can't control what's happening at the federal level, we can control the content that we are putting out. We control the businesses that we're moving forward on, making sure teachers are feeling supported, even if it's not by their federal government. And so I really appreciate the work that you guys are doing, and I'm excited to continue to uplift it. So good luck with everything. It's been really great to talk to you.
Thank you, Meryl. Thanks for having me. It's been wonderful.
This episode of Exceptionally Speaking is brought to you by Hex 24 Press, where education meets imagination. I founded Hex 24 Press in 2024 to uplift educator voices and provide a publishing home for myself and other educators to bring our work into the world. You can find more information about today's guests, including links to their resources and services, at hex24press.com. Thank you for supporting educators, independent creators, and small business. We're so glad you're here.